Okay, Samir, thanks very much. Hello, everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on your screen today. Today's presentation is labeled Lean Personified. I have to admit I struggled a little bit with that title. I don't mean to imply that that I'm the personification of Lean. Basically, what we're going to do over the next just short of an hour is go over some Lean principles and discuss how they apply to your personal life. In previous iterations, I've called this Lean Your Life, and I think it's maybe better titled How to Personalize Lean to Your Own Personal Processes. So very quickly, just a little bit about me. I've been around Lean for about 20 years now. My first exposure was back in the early 90s. I've been consulting through that time. I actually wear a couple of different hats now. And one is as an independent consultant, but I also run a nonprofit organization here in the state of Maryland, my home state. It's a 501c3, and I've been around with it since its beginning. And it's really about helping organizations of all types understand Lean and how to apply it outside of manufacturing into other industries. My current interests are really around the leadership piece and helping people understand the culture of Lean, Lean off of the shop floor, and as we're discussing here today, personal applications of these concepts. So to begin with, I'd just like to start with a couple of reasons why we're seeing this presentation today. There are two key reasons that I'd like to describe. One is going back to this organization that I just mentioned. We've been helping companies of all types understand Lean and apply it. We have consultants who come in and help people to do their first improvement events. And oftentimes what we saw was a backslide. I'd come in perhaps maybe a month or two in and would be looking at how people are doing, sustaining some of the gains that we've helped them to create. Doggone it, we're seeing some backsliding there. And if I start to ask a little 5 whys and seek to understand why, it turns out that in the instances where we saw this, we saw some pretty consistent answers. We had some operator standard work that was not adhered to, and so if we drill down further and understand why that is, there are some various root causes to that, but one of the contributing factors turned out to be a failure of leader standard work. Well, the processes on the shop floor fell apart, and then the leader wasn't there to kind of reinforce those. Somebody was off looking in another direction, spending time elsewhere. And then if we ask why to that, we often come to the senior executive, and the answer comes up, I didn't have time. I was off doing other things, and it became a time management issue. So if you connect the dots, it turns out that in order to support Lean sustainment, one of the things that you often have to solve as a root cause is what are some of the leadership time management issues, the root causes and the factors there. So that's one of the reasons why it is that, that this topic became important. The other is much more personal. And back beginning around 2008, I found myself under a great deal of pressure with the different hats that I wear, and it really came to a crisis point, literally. It's something that put me in the hospital. Here's me during my hospital stay, being a lean zealot once again. But this was just last year. I'm sorry, 2012 now, and it was a life-changing event. I had been interested in Lean from a personal level before. Now it literally became a matter of life and death. So these two reasons are why it is that I've sought out experts on this topic, why I've shared lessons learned with other people who have done this before me, why I've tried to do this at a personal level, and shared those lessons learned with business leaders, trying to help them with many of the same struggles. So let me just dive into these concepts of Lean and then how they apply to Lean at a personal level by describing it this way. Oftentimes I get the opportunity to interact with a senior leader, and oftentimes it's a very brief discussion. It's literally an elevator speech of what is Lean and why is it important to me. And so I've worked to try and hone that elevator speech and boil it down into the simplest, most accurate description that I can think of, and this is the working model that I have so far. It basically comes down to these components. we're trying to create a culture where everybody, every single day, is solving problems in a systematic and a scientific way. There are, yes, other definitions that perhaps many of you out there are more familiar with, things that perhaps involve providing customer value and eliminating waste, and those are not wrong. I wouldn't contradict those, but as the graphic in the upper right corner kind of indicates, I think there are some answers that that are very close to the bullseye, and then I think there are others that perhaps hit a little bit closer. And I would argue that this everybody, every day, systematically solving problems is the closest to the bullseye that I can think of right now. And if anybody has a tighter definition with fewer words and still captures the essence of lean philosophy, then I'm all ears. But it really does come down to that word, philosophy. And that's one thing that I've tried to convey to people. I, like many other practitioners, have come to lean first through tools. I was enamored of tools. I found great application in my early management career, understanding the tools of Commbond as an example, and helping to make product flow. And only after a span of years did I really come to understand the interconnectedness of some of these tools, why it is that we use them, and understanding a little bit more of the systems of lean. And then really it's only later in life that I've come to really appreciate the way that many other people have, that lean is really a way of thinking. And so that's the level of understanding that I'm trying to get people to resonate with when I use that term philosophy. If you think about philosophy and philosophers, just for a moment, if you go all through history and look at philosophers and what they were trying to say to us, they all say different things, but the message, the general outline of their message is very much the same. And it's a person who has spent some time thinking about life, and they come up with a different way of seeing their life. And because of the fact that they see their life in a different way, they behave in a different way. And because they behave in a different way, they get different and better results. And that's the true heart of what lean is all about. It's a philosophy. And from that context, then, we can begin to see how this applies at a personal level as well. This is true in organizational life. Lean thinking is a philosophy. We're trying to get people to see their business life in a different way. We're trying to get them to behave in a different way, and therefore get different and better results from their business life. What's at the core of what I and other people have done is to take this lean thinking philosophy and bring it full circle back into the personal realm. How does this apply to the personal domain? How does this apply to personal processes? So around the end of this presentation, I'll provide some slides that point to other references and provide appropriate attribution in discussing this topic with those practitioners, those authors, and many other very smart and experienced people. What I've distilled, at least for myself, is are these 6 points that I think are critical to understanding and applying lean at a personal level. I think many of you who have some deep experience already with lean philosophy will find some things here that are very recognizable. And these actions, I think, are particularly relevant at a personal level. And I'll spend the balance of my time just providing some examples and some background of how these specific things apply to personal life. First of these is to create standard work. And I think this is critically important. This goes back to one of the fundamental tenets of lean thinking and the Toyota production system that came before it. This quote by Taiichi Ohno is one of the most recognizable and prominent quotes in all of lean thinking, and stemming from the Toyota production system. And what Ohno was saying here is that without some type of a standard, without a process, there really can't be any Kaizen, Kaizen being that term for continuous improvement. And it stands to reason. Whether your background is lean or it's Six Sigma or some other process improvement methodology, think about that term, process improvement methodology. The improvement methodology that you apply can only be applied if process first exists. If process first exists. And if we don't have process, if we don't have some stable, repeatable sequence of activities, even in a very imprecise form, if we don't have something there, then we really can't do things like improve processes, because it becomes very difficult to correlate cause and effect together. So if I do a process in a certain way, and then I think that there's an improvement, and I do it differently again, and if I have a different process for doing this every time, then it becomes very difficult to attach the improved results with things that I did versus variability in the process. What actually did I do? Did it have the desired effect? We don't know. So that's why this first tenet is first among the six. Now this becomes obviously a very difficult thing in many circles. When we talk about standards and standard work in many processes, we get rejection of the concept because it's very difficult to identify the stable, repeatable sequence of activities in some of these processes. Many of them are craft processes, many of them are highly technical, many deal with judgment. And so pictorially, what I've done here on this slide is to kind of present a few examples of processes that might be difficult to identify the process in. So one would be an artisan, a craftsman. Here I've got pictured a woodworker, but this could very easily be somebody who works in metal on maybe some of your shop floors. This could be somebody who deals in research and development, where perhaps the requirements and the specifications for some new project that they're working on is seemingly different every single time. This is maybe one of the best examples that people might offer to say there is no process for what I do. But if you go and look at the other pictures here, to one degree or another, there is an identifiable process or heuristic that's a part of all of them. So as an example, a beginning cook, somebody who's just learning in the kitchen, follows a recipe. That would be an example of a repeatable process. How long does it take me to chop a carrot? How long does it take me to simmer the stew? It's very clear what the content, sequence, timing, and outcomes of those activities should be. Jazz musicians, it's not just a bunch of people doing what they want. There's structure there. There's a key that we have. There's a certain tempo that we're playing at, and if we don't adhere to that, then it will truly be noise. But real jazz music has structure. It has foreground and background. It has complementary parts. If you take a look at a police force or a SWAT team, every situation that they go into is different. They'll tell you that. But they have a common set of practices. They have drills that they go through so that they learn an interconnectedness. That interconnectedness is like the gears of a clock. If you don't understand what the hand and arm signals mean, how long it should take somebody to rush forward for you to cover them, this becomes a very undoable proposition and goes to chaos very quickly. Down in the right-hand corner, you see an example of a pro athlete, and this might be a really good example for all of us to kind of latch onto. Because if you think about what happens with a pro athlete, they're more than just some hack. I mean, I run, but I'm no pro athlete. I just go out there and it's for exercise, and I might keep some numbers and some stats and some tracking of the path that I took. But with a pro athlete, they're continually assessing their own performance. They're making tweaks to the specific things that they're doing. They're correlating those tweaks with an increase in results. There's process there. There's very specific process. And so if you look at this progression that goes left to right, top to bottom, I think one of the challenges would be, how is it that we take some of the things where people say there is no process for what I do, and we get them, and we ourselves begin to think about the things that we do from the standpoint of, let's say, a pro athlete. What I'm doing has process. it may be difficult to see. If I'm that craftsman, I am so deeply entrenched in the process of carving that I haven't really taken the time to step out of myself and see myself as an actor in a process that is in my head, a process that I haven't done anything really to systematize. I'm so deeply in the process that it's difficult to see the process. I think that's part of the challenge. But, you know, I'm not the first one to make this observation by any stretch of the imagination. This concept of seeing process where it may be very difficult to initially see because we've never approached it in that way before. We've been so in the process of doing. This actually goes back all the way to Henry Ford and before. So here's a picture of Frank Gilbreth and Mrs. Gilbreth and their very sizable family. Gilbreth, some of you may be familiar with that name, did a great deal of study about time and motion. So if some of you today are industrial engineers or manufacturing engineers, the time and motion studies that you do today owe a lot to Frank Gilbreth and his family. If you've ever seen the movie Cheaper by the Dozen or old black and white movie, that was actually about Frank Gilbreth. So Gilbreth and his wife became very interested in systematic ways of doing things. And you can imagine if you don't have systematic ways of doing things, if you aren't most efficient as the heads of a household of 12 kids, it becomes chaos very quickly. So Gilbreth took this interest and he actually set up laboratories and did these time and motion studies like you can see here, setting up a mock kitchen and having housewives move through there and maybe prepare some dinner and go to fetch things and put them together into a meal. And this was the beginnings of industrial engineering as we know it today. Of course, you know, this fed forward into Henry Ford, and some of the things that he did with moving assembly lines would have been impossible without some of the work of Frank Gilbreth and his peers. Now, what this led to was a set of standard repeatable things, and these standard repeatable things were given the name Thurblings, or Gilbreth spelled backwards by people who came later. But basically, these were some repeatable activities that we could see again and again, whether it was somebody that was putting a wheel on a Model T, whether it was a housewife that was, let's say, making some stew. We can see these repeatable activities again and again. And they may be different. They may be distinct for the specific task at hand. But the argument that Gilbreth had, based upon the empirical evidence that he developed, was that these standard repeatable activities are the same again and again. So we could take an example of some mundane activity. Let's say it's shaving. And if we were to imagine ourselves as a robot and imagining ourselves as the programmers of that robot, if you're trying to be efficient, if you're trying to write the minimal amount of code, you're going to reuse that code. So you're going to maybe develop a capability to identify an object in space. You're going to identify the capability to reach out and grasp that thing. As we speak here, I'm grasping a glass of water. That grasp function is different for this glass of water than it is for a razor blade, but it's still a grasp function. And so if you think about just about anything that you would do as a matter of routine, you can identify these Thurblings, these the standard repeatable elements. Now, if we take this into the knowledge work domain or to some other domain of activity, this would be a slightly different challenge. I would propose to you that the Thurblings themselves might be different, but they would be repeatable for that domain. So knowledge work in one area would be very similar to knowledge work in the other. My challenge to folks is if you think about the work that you do as an actor and be outside of the action, and you were to observe yourself doing some of these activities that you do in your personal life, the challenge is, what would your Thurblings be? What would be the things that you can identify? And this is part of the core to this technique of identifying standard work. Let me give you an example of what this can mean. let me introduce you to a gentleman by the name of Johnny Boyd, Brigadier General Johnny Boyd. Johnny Boyd was a brilliant fighter pilot from World War II. He was a multiple ace, and afterwards he went on to rise through the ranks. Very aggressive guy. Johnny Boyd's nickname was Genghis John, and he got great acclaim in his skill as a pilot. He went on and took that forward to design the F-15 and F-16 fighters almost single-handedly in their initial design. And so it's things like this that helped him rise to prominence. But what he was most famous for was this. So this is the OODA Loop, the OODA Loop. And what it represents is this. If you think back to the beginnings of air combat, you have to go all the way back to World War I. And as soon as we put up functioning airplanes after the Wright brothers, they went up to go find things like troops dug in, enemy troops dug in, or maybe supply locations. And as soon as we put up those observing planes, then we sent up other planes, and some guy brought along his hunting rifle, and it was the beginning of air combat. There were a set of tactics that were developed for air combat, and between World War I and World War II, the technology changed. Speeds increased, almost the speed of sound. But the basic air combat maneuvers didn't really change all that much. And part of the reason is, if you think about some swashbuckling ace who's going up against the Red Baron in World War I, they've got a certain swagger to them, these fighter pilots. And there's an attitude that, every time that I go up there, I'm practicing the art of pilotage. I'm out there. I don't know if the enemy is going to come at me as one or three. He could be coming straight toward me. He could be coming at an angle. He could be above me, below me. Every time I go up in the sky, it's different. You see, this is an art. There is no process. There's no science to what I do. And with that prevailing attitude, that was one of the things that held the advancement of better tactics back. It's what held those tactics development back for many decades. By the time Boyd came along, post-World War II and into the Korean War, that's when he developed this OODA Loop. And so what he's saying here is this series of activities, observe, orient, decide, and act, are the program that's running in the mind of every pilot that's flying out there, friendly or enemy. And by understanding this, by seeing that this is the program that every pilot's running in the cockpit, if I get inside and disrupt my enemy's OODA Loop, then I can win. And so, as an example, if I make it difficult for him to observe me by obscuring me or using masking, if he sees me but I make it ambiguous as to what my direction or intent is, if I interrupt his decision-making process, maybe if I squeeze a few rounds off in front of the nose of his plane, if I interfere with his ability to fight his plane and to act, and if I do that more effectively than he can, if I do any one of those things and I do that better than my enemy, then I win. Now, once the community of pilots understands this, just prior to the Korean War, innovation in air combat maneuvering takes off, completely takes off. And the reason, primarily, is Johnny Boyd and the OODA Loop. So that's an example of what can happen when it's an example of the difficulty in seeing process when we're so deeply embedded in the doing. And it's also an example of the breakthroughs that are possible when you can actually break through that thinking. So those are some thoughts around this first step of actually creating standard process. And admittedly, that's a challenge, but it's important. The second step here is to measure standard versus actual performance. And that's what we do with this standard. Now, many times when we talk about standard work, whenever we invoke that term, people bristle. And they think that we're trying to dumb down the process, where we're trying to make everything that we do some mindless, dull routine, and nothing could be further from the truth. This isn't something where we're trying to take away from the process, and standard work is not a management tool. Really what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish actual performance versus standard performance and identify the gap. So I'd like to introduce you to somebody else. This guy is Admiral Hyman Rickover. So some of you may know that name. If you don't, Hyman Rickover is the father of the modern nuclear navy. Post-World War II, he took a team of engineers and he tried to do something that had never been thought of before, taking the explosive power of the atom that we discovered and trying to harness it in a controlled way to not only make a functioning nuclear reactor, but to put it on board a submarine with a couple of hundred men, and to power a sub and project military power around the globe. That was his dream. So he took some of the brightest at the time and sequestered them away and had them try and come up with this design. And one of the folks that he depended on was a senior engineer by the name of Theodore Rockwell. This Hyman Rickover was a difficult person to get along with, very brusque, kind of in your face, and he walked around everywhere with the stub of a cigar in his mouth, and he really rode people pretty rough. So he goes up to Rockwell one day, and he stands in his doorway and he says, "Rockwell," he says, "you've got a meeting today with your engineers, do you not?" "Yes, sir, I do." "Tell me," he says, clamping the cigar in his teeth and looking up at the sky. He says, "Tell me, what's the outcome of that meeting going to be?" And Rockwell is understandably perplexed, so he explains the obvious to Rickover. He says, "Sir, that meeting occurs in the future. It hasn't happened yet, so there's no way for me to know what the outcome of that meeting is going to be, sir." And Rickover points this cigar at him. He says, "Aha," he says, "that's why you're an idiot." That's why you're an idiot. So I just want to tell you that if you enjoy that anecdote, it's described in a book called Chasing the Rabbit by Stephen Spear. Very insightful anecdote, and I think one of the most important anecdotes that I've read about the nature of lean. What he's saying, what he did was he let Rockwell kind of stew in his juices for a while, and then he came back a while later and explained what he meant. He said, "Listen, we're doing something here that's never been done before. We're monkeying with the atom, and we can only guess what's going on inside the atom." Now, it's a multidimensional problem that they were working on. You know, if you have a reactor of a certain power, it puts out some radiation. You need shielding around it. You need a boat of a certain size to carry that reactor and the shielding. If the power is higher, then the shielding gets larger, and the boat gets bigger, and the whole thing runs away. So, you know, understanding the connectedness between these, the connections between these different aspects of the design is critically important. What he told Rockwell was this. He said, you know, think about a bench experiment that your engineers are running. Right? You've got a radiation source on one side, a detector on the other, some steel plate in the middle, and your boys determined that the reading should be 15.0, whatever. It should be 15.0. So now they actually run the experiment, and they determine that the actual number is 14.8. Oh, great! You know, most engineers would say, "Oh, great! That means that we don't need as much steel plate for shielding. The whole boat can be lighter, and so here's the design, and we go merrily on our way." Rickover observes we can't be satisfied with that. See, because if we predict 15.0 and it turns out to be 14.8, then possibly there could be something wrong with our model of what's going on in the atom. Possibly our model could be entirely wrong. So now what happens, do you think, when we have 200 sailors in this boat 2 miles below the surface of the ocean and something unexpected occurs in the nature of the atom? we can't tolerate this, you see. We have to be rigorous in establishing the theory of what the reading should be and comparing that with actual evidence, with actual experiment. You need to reinforce this thinking in all the things that you do. You see, when you go to this meeting, you haven't established a prediction of what data people are going to bring, what conclusions they're going to draw, and what that's going to mean for the design. You don't know, as a result, if somebody says something wildly off base or somebody says something insightful. You have no basis for understanding that because you have not developed a prediction of what people are going to say. That, Rickover says to Rockwell, is why you are an idiot. Now, I think that is incredibly profound. And it emphasizes the importance of making sure that we measure standard versus actual performance. So going back now, what do we do with that standard work that we develop in the first step of personal lean? The second piece of this is we actually measure standard versus actual performance. Now, to help make that easier, one of the next key steps here is to make things visual. So I've got a few personal examples that thrown in here, among many that other people have come up with, but I'm just going to show you a few. One is this. I wonder right now, as we're spending some very pleasant time here on the computer together, how many of you have, let's say, 100 emails in your inbox? How many of you might have 2, 3, 500? This is a shot of my target for every single day. And you see over here on the right side, that's inbox 0. So whatever comes in, I either dispose of it, I don't need to look at it, I deal with it right then at certain windows of time during the day, or I file it away. And if I file it, I put it into one of the project folders that you see in the middle, and I also tag it with an expectation of how much time that it's going to take, and that's the color code that you see down at the bottom center. And I tag that with a follow-up date. Now, with these things, then, I can create a calendar that looks like this. And so this is the way that my calendars look for the last couple of years. You see, like as an example, on Monday, I have a meeting in the morning. I have to be on a flight in the afternoon. I've got a span of 5 hours in there where I can get something functional done. And when you do this in Outlook, you don't have to do it in Outlook. There are other methods. But then all of these tasks down at the bottom, you see them listed down below there. There's a green one. I know that's 2 hours. There's 2 orange ones. That's half an hour each. There's 15 minutes in red and some change all in white. So I know that that's about 3 hours and 15 minutes worth of work, which fits inside 5 hours pretty nicely. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to create a visual management system for the flow of work that I have in my email system. And I'm helping to ensure that the demand that I place on myself does not exceed my capacity to do it. And that's critically important. It doesn't matter if we're creating a schedule for a factory or if we're creating a schedule for ourselves personally. And this is all enabled by visual management. What I'm trying to do here is to actually use my calendar as a prediction of how I expect my day to unfold. And I'll show you some examples later on of exactly what that looks like. But I'm just trying to follow that advice that Rickover gave us. I'm trying not to be an idiot. I'm trying to develop a prediction of how my day is supposed to go, and then comparing at the end of the day, how did it actually go versus how did I plan it to go. Another example here of visual management, these are the magazines that I read. I put them into these folders, and you can see my red and green visual indicator down at the bottom. I'm basically using this as an indicator of whether or not I'm keeping up with the inflow of magazines and journals that are coming in. If I see it go into the red, I know that I need to take some of that discretionary time that I have coming up and direct that to chipping away at keeping up with some of these new things that are coming in and people are writing about. You can imagine this doesn't stop at my business life. This is the visual management system that we have for chores in my house. You see red Post-its there for myself, my wife, and our 5-year-old daughter who's just getting bored with this. And this is designed to solve a specific problem. Whenever I take off on some consulting gig and I go away for a week, oftentimes, if it's that or if my wife has been doing something, we both have chores and the ball gets dropped. How do we develop a visual management system that says, on this date, I'm unable to do this activity, it goes to this person, and it has or has not been completed. So where you see the today marker over on the left-hand side, up at the top, if you see anything in that column at the end of the day, then that's an indication that there's still work left to be done and it hasn't been accomplished yet. So again, these are all designed to solve specific problems, but they're examples of making things visual so that we can manage them better. The fourth step that I'm recommending for folks is then to systematically improve. Once we've created standard work, we've used it as a means for measuring predicted versus actual. We put in some visual management system to make that more clear. Now we need to improve in a systematic way. So some of the thinking that has clouded my head recently has been around Toyota Kata. And I'm not sure if anybody out there has read this book yet by Mike Rother, the author of Learning to See, and the one who's introduced many of us to value stream mapping. But Toyota Kata is turning out to be a book that's getting a lot of traction and describes how it is that we systematically improve. And it really captures the essence of what we mean by plan, do, check, act. So it's very powerful in that regard. And in this example, we're just saying if we look up to the limits of our knowledge, up to the limits of our vision, we might be able to see in this example, we can see across this landscape up until that first big rise over the hill. And if we're sending somebody out there, maybe down the road, we could say something like, well, watch out over by this bridge. You step off there and you might get stuck in the mud. Up at the top of the hill, there's a big pothole. Watch out for that. Basically, if you want them to succeed on this journey down the road, you can prepare them by telling them about the obstacles that they might that they're going to see this side of the current knowledge threshold, and prepare them with specific countermeasures. But what happens when they go over that next rise? What happens when they go over the hill and they encounter something that they haven't encountered before? You can't prepare them with that specific. What you need is a generic problem-solving methodology. No matter what they encounter, whether it's a pole lying across the road or a dead skunk or whatever, they've got a systematic approach for doing that. It turns out that technique is PDCA, good old mundane plan, do, check, act. The Deming cycle, the Shewhart cycle, it's common knowledge, but it's not common practice. And going back to its basis, there's a very strong parallel within the scientific method. We're actually encouraging people to observe nature, develop a hypothesis about what's going on there, conduct controlled experiments to test their theory of how nature works, and then comparing those results versus the hypothesis. That full cycle of plan, do, check, act is really what's behind the scientific method as we know it today. And it's behind the systematic problem-solving methodology that we're trying to encourage people to embrace. So the practices of Kata, Toyota Kata, may sound unfamiliar, but really, if we think about the PDCA and the scientific method, that's what I'm encouraging people to do with this system. Use PDCA as a systematic method to improve the processes in your personal life. And that can be exceedingly difficult sometimes because, again, we get caught in this doing mindset. We all have pressures. We're all deeply embedded in our own personal processes, and it becomes difficult to distinguish where some of these improvement opportunities lie. In the same way that we rely on a coach outside of our own skin in order to provide observation and feedback, I would say that even if we're talking about our own personal processes, over the course of a few years of doing this, I can tell you that I've gotten a great deal of value by just by sharing my thoughts and observations about my personal processes with somebody outside of my own skin, just somebody to kind of be a buddy. And let's say I'm trying to develop a good golf swing, to look at this book that I've been studying on golf and say, listen, I'm going to take a few swipes at this ball. I'd like you to just take a look at what's in this book, look at what I'm doing, and see if you see what I'm doing wrong. Oh yeah, you're not looking at the ball. You're not holding your arm straight, and so on. It's things that are terribly difficult to do from a first-person perspective. So, as my friend Bruce Hamilton up in the Greater Boston Manufacturing Partnership says, the problem is seeing waste. And the value of coaching, even for personal processes, is extremely valuable. Generally, what I think this often comes down to is the specifics may be different, but whenever I come up with a gap of what the predicted versus the actual was, it falls into two categories. It's either an issue with the plan that I had. The plan was inadequate. The plan was ill-informed. The plan was gross miscalculation of how much time and effort and what the steps were involved in this project, or it was a problem with execution. The plan was perfectly good, but something came along and it interrupted the execution. It's something that we couldn't predict, but that there may be ways where we can insulate ourselves from that and improve the execution. So it's either an opportunity for improvement and countermeasure application in planning of what we're doing or in the execution of what we do. The next step then is pursuing perfection. And this is one of the core tenets of Lean in a broader sense, from an organizational sense, and it's true at a personal level as well. 4 methods that I'm just going to breeze through very quickly. These slides will go quick. 4 specific methods that I'd like to ask you to consider. One is controlling work in process and flow. We all have a lot of things that are going on at the same time. And we're trying in many cases to remember those things, to remember them, and plant them in our heads. And we oftentimes things fall through the cracks because we forgot. Is this the best use for our brains? Is it that our brains are really just a placeholder for all these little post-its? If they could take physical form, would all of the things we're trying to remember in our brains look like this image? Is that the best use for our brains? Should we be thinking at a higher level, processing information, identifying some trends and underlying themes? So the trick then becomes, how is it that we can control the work in process that we have and create better flow? Now, one of the techniques that I found very, very helpful was from this book called Personal Commbond. Commbond, this Japanese term for sign or signal, the way that we make materials flow in the physical world. This has actually been latched on to the people in software development, and they've repurposed it to actually create this technique of personal Commbond, where they collect the things that need doing into a backlog pile. You bring things as you're working on them over into the doing pile, and there's only a very small space allowed in this doing box. Personally, I only have space for 3 things that I can do at any given time, so that that helps me focus. And then I put those things when they're done over in the done column. This is not me, this is my brother-in-law, so I have infected the rest of my family with this concept. Here he is at at the software firm where he works, and he's a great advocate for this, not just from a professional level in the things that he does, but also personally. So that's one of the key themes there, is to try to limit work in process personally and create better flow. The second concept that we find in manufacturing cells and also in administrative environments is concentrating work in time and space. Even at a personal level, many of the processes that we have are distributed across different locales. It occurs over different times, and that just creates these wait states where things eventually come back to our inbox. We don't process them right away because we're busy doing something else, and so on. So a lot of that has to do with the design of the work that we have, and it ties in with this third recommendation, which is to limit multitasking. I think there's a general perception out there that multitasking is a good and efficient thing. And for certain low-order tasks like walking and chewing gum at the same time, that's true. But for higher-order thinking processes, that's definitely not the case. So here's an example of an experiment that you could do. Take a blank sheet of paper and take a pen and grab a stopwatch and just write these things out in these rows. Write out the word multitask in big block letters. Right below it, write the numerals 1 through 9, and then write out the first 9 letters. And go ahead and do that, and take a look at the time that it takes you. Now, once you got that, go ahead and flip that paper over and then do this again, but do it this way. Instead of writing out the rows, write out the columns. Write down the first letter of multitask. Write down 1, write down A underneath it. Then go to the next column and write out U and 2 and B and so on. Do this without the benefit of looking at a master. Just sit there and write it out from a blank sheet of paper. Gather your time. If you're like most people, what you're going to find is the best time that you can do 2 versus 1 is 150% of that time. Best case. So it just goes to show you that when you have higher order thinking processes where you need to jump from one topic to another, multitasking is not a boon. It's a bane. It's a problem. The last step here is to deal with unknowns. We're pretty good at not doing this, honestly. Don Rumsfeld was famous in his tenure at one point for having this little speech where he was telling somebody the fact that there are known knowns and there are unknown unknowns, and then there are known unknowns. And it was very confusing for people, but you know, what he was basically saying there is there are certain things that are known unknowns, and we tend to ignore them. We tend to ignore them pretty well. Here's an example of what the effect is. If you look at some series of activities, here's the way that it might go nice and steady, and it's not a problem at all. There's a few different sources of variability. One might be with respect to start time, so certain things start later or sooner than planned, and perhaps there's some other variability with respect to duration. So this might be true in a production environment. It would certainly be true in an office environment with personal processes, and this is really not a problem for sparsely loaded schedules. There's the slack in there to accommodate that. The problem actually comes up when we start to heavily load the schedule. So these areas where you see this deep red, this is overlap, and as a result, you know, you can't do 2 things at once. The things here are going to slide to the right, and the whole problem cascades. So, you know, what I'm describing here, this is not opinion. I would assert that this is fact. If you go to books like Factory Physics, what you find is mathematical justification for what it is that I'm describing here. And what this shows, I won't go into the details here, but if you take a look at this source, this book, Factory Physics, or this article, Getting the Most from Your Product Development Process, what this basically says is once you have tightly packed schedules for a process that is nominally variable, you're going to have problems. And this is something that the business community really doesn't want to hear too much of right now. But it's mathematically justifiable. It's the type of thing that we have to grapple with. And if we're creating schedules for ourselves that do not accommodate some of the natural variability that's in there today, from a personal level or professional one, we're going to have a tough time. Let me start to wrap up then, and just go to this last section, which I think is critically important. We have to ask the value of why. Why are we doing these things? We have to, in lean circles, we ask the question of value. Who's the customer? What do they want? This is no less true in our personal lives. The things that we're doing are activities. Are these activities meaningful? Are they actually summing up to produce what we would want in the end to be a good life? So I'm running a little bit short on time. I'm just going to skip over a couple of slides here that kind of set the stage for this. But let me go to this with you. In recent years, I've put together a personal Hoshi Plan. And so some of you may be familiar with that term. It's the type of thing that we do in business in order to take a high-level strategy and boil it down to a set of executable activities. I've thought very carefully over the last couple of years, especially after my health scare, with making sure that my life actually summed up to something of value at the end. When I look at future me, am I going to be happy with what it is that I've done? Have I devoted my energies in the right directions? So for me, I have a plan that covers these particular dimensions: personal, professional, family, and community. And for all of the things that I do, I've kind of mapped it into those areas, and I've said, here's what I'm going to commit to this year. And it's been very helpful. I have to tell you, it's been a great way to justify saying no to something, because I'm very much an ooh shiny kind of a guy. Whenever somebody comes up with a cool project, I want to jump in there and do it. And this personal Hoshi Plan has been a great way to tap on the brakes and say, now wait a minute, how does this actually help me achieve my life goals? Is this of real value to me if I am my own customer? And occasionally, this is a picture down here at the bottom of the Maryland Science Center. Occasionally, it helps to really create some great multiple wins. So I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to do an improvement project at the Science Center here in Baltimore, and it was great because it was personally fulfilling. It was a great professional opportunity to get involved with some lean administration in a nonprofit organization. My family and I are members there, so it benefits us. And it's a great thing to do for the community. I consciously offloaded other projects in order to work on this because this created the multidimensional win. I think that's one of the key benefits here. And I'd really invite people to take a look at this technique and what this means. Just to wrap up a few quick images here. This is the plan that I put together 2 years ago, and it shows those 4 quadrants. You can't see the details here, but each one of those groups of Post-it notes describes a particular project and how it relates to those 4 quadrants. This then ties in with that. This is a page out of my personal notebook that I carry around, and this helps me connect the dots. Here's an A3 document that just shows here's my personal fitness goals. Here's the specific things that I'm going to do. Here are the measures. Here's the results from my project plan. And it just kind of helps to fill in the details there. And then on a daily basis, I just have this bowling chart that describes here's all the things that I need to do on a running basis in order to make sure that I'm keeping up with all of the activities that at the end of the year sum up to my personal set of Hoshi goals. So these are all lean techniques that we find in business that I think has a great deal of personal application. They've been very powerful for me personally, and I'd invite you to take a look at these and apply them. Experiment with applying them to your life and see what types of results you get. Again, as I said at the beginning, I wanted to acknowledge some of the folks who've done some remarkable work in this area. Here's a list of some of the favorite books that have informed me on this journey. They've been very valuable to me, and I hope they will for you as well. With that, Samir, I'll stop here and invite folks to ask questions if they have any. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Jeff. I think I already have the comments flowing in, the questions not yet. As people, first of all, I want to thank you for sharing, and I can use some of these things that you showed here right away.
There, that's my payday right there. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So this is really great, and I think Mariam and Bill also shared the same thing. They said this was very insightful, very useful, and they liked your Outlook examples, and they said I can use it right away, and I feel the same. So as I said again, just a quick going back to my logistics slide is this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on the ASQ Lean Enterprise Division website, and it actually includes question and answer session as well. And I just want to remind you before I come to the question that we have our next webinar by KD is about DMAIC and autism, a sample size of 1, and this looks very interesting, and she will be talking about an overview of how DMAIC and various lean tools can be utilized in home environment to improve the quality of life for a child who is diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. And that will be on 12th of February, which is the second Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. I am going to the question, and I'm going to ask the first question here, Jeff. They are asking you, what is the Toyota book mentioned in Gaining Traction?
Yes.
Name of the Toyota book.
Yeah, the Toyota book that's getting a lot of traction these days is Toyota Kata. That second word is Kata, K-A-T-A. published in 2010 by Mark Rother.
Okay. And I think that question came from Petra and Lawrence. She also asked for the list of books. I'm not sure if any other book was discussed, but I remember you discussed the Toyota book.
Sure.
So is there any other books you did discuss here? If you can pull up the slide quickly and let them take a notes here?
Sure. It's up right now, and a few of the ones that I've really enjoyed are these. In addition to Toyota Kata, that's all about short cycle improvement and PDCA. Lean Solutions by Womack and Jones, the same people who wrote Lean Thinking, I think provides some very insightful perspectives on how it is that we take lean out of the factory environment and physical processes and really apply those to address more customer-facing problems. So what does a customer have to do in order to do something like get a car serviced, as an example? If you think about what customers have to go through, if you think about that from a personal level, where we are really some of the customers of our own processes, it's a very helpful perspective to adopt. It wasn't addressed in Lean Thinking. It really hits home in Lean Solutions. Lean Office and Service Simplified by Drew Locker. There are a lot of examples in there of how Lean applies to administrative processes, but Locker does an excellent job of getting to of connecting some of these practices with good Lean principles, and some of the steps that he advises that people go through in examining their administrative processes are really a very good template for doing that at a personal level as well. If you like what I showed you using Outlook as a calendar to kind of capture tasks and to do time management, that is described a little bit in Getting Things Done. David Allen's book. He prefers to use manila folders, and that's fine. He's agnostic with respect to technology, but the basic design of things is that I showed you on the screen is exactly as he's described. Very, very prolific thought leader on that. Personal Commbond just also won a Shingo Prize, really. Jim Benson and Tony and DeMaria Berry. People have really enjoyed this. I've had them come out and talk to some folks out here in my neck of the woods, and it's really insightful, and it's very simple to do. I use the technique every day, and I really love it. Dan Markovitz's book, A Factory of One, really kind of is breakthrough when it comes to taking the concepts of Lean and applying them at a personal level. So I recommend all of them.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, Jeff. We have a few questions, but I just want to make it clear. At this time, the webinar is officially over. You are welcome to stay and ask questions for some more time. And for the people who are leaving or have to leave due to other commitments, this webinar is being recorded, and the extra questions as well, and they will be posted on the Lean Enterprise Division website. Being said that, I just want to thank our audience, and just want to let them know that we will be continuing the question and answer session for a few more minutes.
For those who do need to drop out now, thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to some more questions here.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for staying for our audience. So we have a question from Catherine. It said, do you have any advice on emotional or psychological issues that are often associated with Lean techniques in personal life?
Oh, my goodness.
Bias is painful, so she wanted advice.
That's a great question. And I have to say that, yeah, the psychological underpinnings of why we do what we do, why we want what we want, has been something that has really been foremost on my mind recently. I know that from a personal level, I can tell you that some of the things that I've showed you help to give me a much clearer dashboard. I don't think that 5 years ago I had as good a handle on my personal time as I do today. But even though I've got better tools for seeing, let's say, when I'm overcommitted, what I've found is that hasn't put a dent in the frequency with which I overcommit. I know that seems paradoxical, but clearer dashboard has not led personally for me, to better behaviors, maybe in a little bit to some degree. So it's really forced me to focus in on the psychology of why we do what we do, and why as an example, why I personally tend to overcommit. There are a lot of people who have the same issue, and I think these personal lean techniques certainly make it clearer. They certainly make the rationale for why we do things a lot more clear. But in the end, I think we also need to kind of step outside of the lean domain and go into the psychological domain and connect those two so that we have some well-established, very supportable and accepted techniques for changing our own personal behaviors. And I think those come from psychology. I'm not a psychologist. I don't pretend to be, and I can tell you that I have begun to gather fewer books on lean and more on psychology to try and follow the path to where this is leading. I want to change my own personal behaviors. I want to get different results from my life, and I feel like I've gotten a good start on that. But psychology holds a lot of the answers that I'm looking for.
Thanks, Jeff. Another question is there any cheat sheet of strategies one can use to convince people to see themselves as an actor in the process?
Oh, good question. I think that that cheat sheet, so far as I know, doesn't quite exist yet. But if you go to a few of the works that by these authors that I just referenced, they do provide some really good talking points that can help persuade people of the first of all, that this can be done. We can find process within the things that we do. Everything in the world that people do is not purely an art. Even an artist has things that are routinizable, are more mundane activities. The actual creative part of what an artist or an artisan does is actually a pretty small fraction of what takes up the majority of people's days. So, if we talk about engineers, there was a guy who ran a place called the Lockheed Skunk Works, a guy named Kelly Johnson, and he wrote about this book where he wrote in this book where he assessed the time that his engineers were spending during the day, and he found that actually a very small fraction of it was engineering and actually putting pen to paper designing the aircraft. A lot of it was other stuff. It was meetings. It was tracking spreadsheets. It was conversing with people. It was taking care of a paycheck. It was a bunch of other things. And when we offload those things off of out of people's lives, we find that there's actually a very small fraction of time that is truly creative work. So I think that challenge would be something that I'd offer to folks who find a struggle trying to identify the routinizable elements in what they do. And like I said, some of these other books do provide some other helpful frameworks for having that good discussion with folks.
Thanks, Jeff. We have another question. Ted finds some of the concepts are similar to the book by Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm glad that you picked up on that. Covey is a book that I failed to mention just because I think the only reason was that there are some more contemporary works out there that I think are more directly related to this concept of lean philosophy and applying it to the personal level. But I think that there are a few other books, and Stephen Covey's book was among them, that really did inform the whole approach to this topic. And yeah, I think Covey's work is really great. Some of the concepts that he has, like beginning with the end in mind, and others in his works, are directly applicable to this. So yes, there is a connecting thread. Very good.
James is asking question. Explain the difference doing and improving mindset?
Yeah. The improving mindset is something that I think people struggle with, going all the way back to lean manufacturing, people who are out there actually doing the work. It's been a real transformative tipping point in people's thought processes. In the current understanding that we have of lean, it's very important that we integrate improvement with the work. So I think in days past, there was, if you go back to even the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, we had situations in workplaces where we just wanted people to, put their noses to books, put their shoulder to the wheel, and just do this work. Here, I've had some very smart people design this set of activities. You do step A, step B, step C. It should take you, 3.5 minutes to do, and we're going to supervise you and watch that you do that to quality and to speed. There was an intelligent design to the work. It was done by other people. You people just be my dumb hands and carry out the tasks specified. That's the old image of what work is. In the modern day, we understand that improvement is integrated in with the work. So if I'm a worker in a modern factory or an office, it's no longer acceptable in an operationally excellent organization that we simply say, just get product out the door. Get your inbox cleared out. Do the work, and I'm satisfied. If the process is going to continually improve, and it really is going to be everybody, every day, systematically solving problems, then we want people who, at the end of the day, are going to, they're going to say, today was a good day, but it wasn't great. I had this struggle, I had this problem, I had this thing go wrong, this thing wasn't available when I wanted it. So what's the one thing that I'm going to do, the one little change that I'm going to make tomorrow will make tomorrow a better day process-wise and performance-wise than today was? What's that one thing going to be? And if you've got a whole company full of people that are doing that, then that's the true essence of continuous improvement and the true heart of lean. We want people who are going to do that, and honestly, that's part of the challenge at a personal level as well. We have to struggle to get out of the doing, to get out of the simple, blind, mindless act of clearing out our inbox and not thinking about the nature of the work, not thinking about, it wasn't a great day, how can I change something to make tomorrow a better day than today was? That I think is the essence of what it is that I was trying to convey there.
Thanks, Jeff. Another question is, how can we overcome the belief of many that lean is a tool used by the management to get more out of employees for less?
Yeah, that's something that that a lot of folks have to overcome all the time. I think there's an outdated paradigm of lean as a set of tools, and I think we're just starting to get there. I'm associated with the folks over at the Shingo Prize. I think that's one example. The Shingo Prize model kind of picks apart and dissects how operationally excellent organizations do what they do. And if you look there, it's not a collection of tools. It's not something that you do to somebody. It's a mindset that helps people, like I said about philosophy, see their work in a different way and improve their way forward. It's an unfortunate truth that many people have been exposed to some change initiative that was built around an archaic paradigm of what lean is. That scar tissue, that damage really can't be undone. I think if we proceed forward from this point in history and begin with the notion that's almost like the Hippocratic Oath: first, do no harm. We have to go back and we have to emphasize to people that when we talk about the Toyota production system, where lean springs from, we're talking about two foundational pillars. One is continuous improvement, and it's important, but it can't stand alone. The other pillar there is respect for people, respect for humanity. And we need to go way beyond just lean as a tool set. Once we do that, we reduce this really to its most superficial essence. We need to really, as a community of lean practitioners, I think, really walk the talk. And when we talk about improving work, it's improving work for the people who are doing the work. We can't run around with a notion that lean is a tool set anymore. That's old thinking. And I think that the best way to do that is to behave in accordance with that principle.
Thanks, Jeff. Another question by Bill. Is there any lean processes regarding nutrition, preparation of meal for runners in particular?
Good question. I don't think that I've run across that yet. I'd be very, I'm going to be intrigued to maybe go Google that now and see what I can find. But I think that there are some, while there isn't anything that's lean per se, I think that there are some approaches to nutrition and exercise that I've seen that are that don't put everybody into the same category. I mean, my wife's body style is different than mine. She and other people have different current diets. They process energy in different ways. The whole this gets pretty I think esoteric into things like biomechanics, but the bottom line is there's no one pat answer. I think that there are some principles to follow. There are some theories about how you can get better performance and use nutrition as an effective tool in weight loss and increasing energy and performance. But if you go back to this model of plan, do, check, act, you're developing a theory. You're following a hypothesis of what can be a useful approach to improve. And the real proof is in the experiment with it. So I think that that kind of flavors everything that you see out there as this diet or that model or that training approach. Interesting theory. What is it based on, and how can I experiment with that to see if that actually generates results for me? So lean per se, maybe not, but PDCA based, I think that there's some good things that are out there that I've just skimmed. Okay,
we are 15 minutes over, and we'll just wrap up with one final question, and this is an interesting one by Russ. What Russ says is sometimes variability suggests important breakthrough opportunities, creative solutions, unexpected exceptional performance outcomes. If you have a highly structured motion seeking a different outcome, how do you redirect the effort to capitalize on this kind of fortuitous occurrence?
I think I understood the question, and it's the serendipity question. Yeah, so this has been one that I've really struggled with. And it goes back to that bias that I described that I have for myself and that a lot of type A people have, and that is the tendency to try to maximize capacity and to load as much stuff in there as possible. If you run a highly compressed schedule with every minute scheduled to the minute, then it makes it really difficult to take advantage of those new opportunities that come along. It's one of those known unknowns that I mentioned before. I don't think that I put a lot of these things into the category of an unknown unknown. I think that there are certain opportunities and needs that pop up from time to time. We can be pretty confident that they're going to occur. So, I'll give you an example. In my day, let's say I have an average work day and I'm able to spend about 8 or 9 hours in the office. Let's call it 9. I've discovered, and it's taken years of data to convince myself of this, I've discovered that if I try to schedule more than 5 hours worth of stuff in a day, then I'll probably fail. Now, I wasn't too happy with this data, and I resisted it for a long time, and I kept flipping it over thinking that there's got to be some mistake here. There's got to be something I'm doing wrong. It turns out to be a fact. You know, with the nature of the work that I do and being a father of 2 kids under 5, these pop-up demands and these pop-up opportunities, whether we're talking about Daddy, can you take me to soccer, or I've got this whiz-bang project that you've just got to do. Short-term, long-term, big or small, those things are going to happen, and we need to have the reserve capacity in our schedules in order to accommodate that. So on a daily basis, I don't schedule more than 5 hours. I have Fridays every fortnight that has nothing scheduled, and I have reserve capacity on my yearly calendar that just begs to be filled with something, and I simply refuse to do it in January because I know that by the time we get to June, a huge opportunity is going to come along. It's a known unknown, and I'm not suggesting that we have blind faith in that happening. What I'm saying is hold that as a hypothesis to be something that you believe to be true, and then collect the data and demonstrate that fact for yourself. I think that I've done that on a personal level, and that's given me the fortitude to not fill in those gaping holes in the calendar that just scream to be filled with something, because I know that those known, unknown opportunities and demands are out there, and they're going to come up.
Being said that, I would like to conclude, and I just want to thank Jeff and the audience again for staying extra to get your questions answered. If there are any other questions, I would encourage you to reach out to Jeff. His email is still shared on this screen, and I just want to thank everyone attending the webinar. And we'll see you next month.
Very good. And for everybody out there, again, thanks for sticking around for the last of the questions. I want to acknowledge again all the people that have put in some great thought work on this topic. I know that these ideas have been very helpful for me, and I hope they will for you as well. Thank you.